Welcome, Uncle Sugar's Magic Circus. Keith, I hear we got another letter.
Sal, I'm beside myself. Christy and I bought a warehouse to store the mail in, and it's already full. I guess with the Chinese flu, people have nothing better to do, so they're just killing us. But we got an interesting letter today.
Yeah.
We got a letter from a Corporal Bill Shakespeare. Now, I'm not going to tell you what unity is in, but he says, I'm trying to get into special operations community, but I also have an interest in becoming a writer. Now, a lot of my buddies in the barracks say there's no such thing as marine authors because they're morons, and if you knew my friends, you'd agree. But that being said, would it be possible for you guys to get a marine author on as a guest? And, guess what, Bill? We got a surprise for you. And he's also got a PS in here. He said, a lot of my friends in the barracks love the show, but they're not followers.
Yeah, subscribe.
They're not subscribing to the show. I tell them it's only 3 keystrokes to do it on YouTube, but they're lazy grunts. That gives you a clue what Unity's in. And I wish more people would do it because I love your show, blah, 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 which is a very nice shout-out from him. He's a nice guy.
Yeah.
But, Bill, we got a surprise for you today. We have an author, a marine author.
Yeah. Col Andy Milburn retired. Andy is author of this book, which I just finished reading, fantastic book. Won the Tempest Gathers. For Mogadishu to the fight against ISIS, Marine Special Operations Commander at War. You want to learn about the humanity or the human side of being a commander. This guy writes really, really well. He did 30 years on active duty. He was with 5th, 7th, and 3rd Marines. He fought from Mogadishu in '93 through the march up in OIF 1. Fought at Fallujah. He was at Karma. He fought Libya. And he ended his career basically as a siege assault commander, which was big deals, especially he was the first Marine to ever command a unit like that in the fight against ISIS up in Mosul. So an amazing guy to be able to answer this question, and he runs in the same circles as we have.
Yeah.
So we know a lot of the same people as well. So we thought we'd ask Andy to come on and talk about his book, but also just get a feel for how he got in the Marine Corps and those kinds of things. So welcome, Andy.
Hey, let me just turn this off. Hey, Bill, so first of all, don't do it, man. The Marine Corps is incurably anti-intellectual, and trust me, you will take yourself out as being a bit of a pariah. But on that point, Sal, and I'm glad you asked me that. And for the listeners, no, Sal did not set this up with a script or anything. But there's actually a really healthy part of our culture, right? I mean, generally as Marines, MARSOC even more so, that avoids any type of self-promotion. We really do as a culture. So you think about it, you think about how few books have been written by Marines about the wars of the last 15, 20 years. And I won't draw a contrast to any other special operations communities, but there are some stark contrasts out there. But even Army SF, there's a flood of Green Beret books on the shelves. So having said, I think that's a healthy ethos. Great question would be then, so why you, Milburn, are you writing a book like this that is a memoir? Well, Sal, number one, you've read the book, and I would hope you agree that it's anything but a self-promoting memoir. It's pretty painfully honest. But in truth, I didn't set out to write a book. I really didn't. I came back from the last deployment as Siege Assault Commander in the counter-ISIS fight in Iraq, where I was absolutely privileged to lead among the 2 SOTFs, a Marine SOTF up there. And that's kind of an untold story that I tell in the book. And amazingly, the Pentagon, after 9 months, agreed to release that. But anyway, so I came back from that. And I was motivated by a couple of things. Unfortunately, a couple of them negative. I had suffered a family tragedy. I lost my daughter right before the deployment. So I was certainly dealing with some delayed grief. I was probably dealing to, without making a big fanfare of this, I think, I hope you agree that I've handled this as well as I could in the book, that I was dealing with probably an aggregate of combat stress over the years, and I was dealing with some immediate frustrations, memories of frustrations, dealing with my chain of command, not a Marine chain of command, I hasten to add, a conventional Army chain of command in Iraq, that any of your listeners who served in Iraq or Syria will absolutely, I hope, sympathize with. Certainly in Iraq, it was a tough time to deal with that particular Army division. So anyway, I came back, and I wasn't good about following my own advice about, getting help. I mean, we are, in the end, it's still a tough call, isn't it, to reach outside yourself and say, hey, I'm having issues. And so most of us, I think, gravitate into outlets that are either healthy or in some respect, like extreme physical exercise, or unhealthy, like, alcohol, or a combination thereof. And I think probably a lot of us have.
Yeah, we're not drinking right now. It's 10 in the morning. Don't worry about a thing.
Sal says, taking a big swig of this, I wouldn't thought about this. Don't worry, I'm getting to the answer to your question. Okay. So anyway, I had all this kind of an angst piled up. I had started a pretty high pressure job that I loved, actually, down in Special Operations Command Central as the Chief of Staff at the time. So I had to get my shit together. I couldn't just, hang out on the beach and drink beer and sink into myself. So I started writing, and I started writing with a view initially to thinking, hey, maybe my kids, when they grow up, will be interested to see this. And then I found I really enjoyed it. And it was painful because I hadn't written like that for a long time. We're used to military writing, which is really uninteresting type writing. So I was writing in a way that I wanted to captivate my kids when they were older, make it come alive. And so
that's exactly what you did, Andy.
Yeah.
Like, I don't mean to interrupt you, but man, when I was reading the book, I talked to you on the phone and I was telling you that, like, this is one of the best books I've read in terms of being able to. It's just written from a really human perspective.
Well, you do the skin jump because
you really do.
It's the storytelling piece. So you do that skin jump as the reader. Now, it's easy for us to put ourselves. Of course, our background is parallel, but it's easy for us to put ourselves in that moment that you're in as you're writing. And that's the key, I think, to being a good author, is to have that ability. And you talk about the help piece.
But I think it's the honesty. I think because you hit on that in your epilogue as well, that you were going to put some of this stuff in there, and you had a friend who told you, I really think you should put some more of the personal stuff in there. And I think that is actually the part that really captivates you about this book, is that you weave in like this emotional component that puts me there with you. And it's really, really well
done. To put
done.
that down in writing, because the course Sal and I teach over at MARSOC, we teach instructors how to be instructors. MARSOC guys how to teach. To get them to do a proper introduction, you have to talk about yourself. It's like pulling teeth, and the first words out of their mouths like, "Hey, Keith, I don't want to be a bragger." This isn't bragging. You have to have a human element involved here, so the students can connect to you. The Marines are terrible at it. Terrible at it.
Yeah, we're bad at self-promotion.
We are. It's part of our ethos. That's really interesting. You guys do that. I would love to obviously stay in contact and chat on that. JSAL right now, or as an adjunct faculty. And by the way, any of your listeners, don't worry, I'll get back on topic. But any of your listeners considering retirement, JSAL, there's a lot of billets. You can work there as either a GS or a contractor teaching, and especially for some of your audience who are already teaching, in the special operations community, it's an awesome job. And I realized that teaching was one aspect of, it was the aspect of being an officer or being a leader that I enjoyed the most. It really was. I loved it, but I didn't realize it. I couldn't kind of cut through to it. But anyway, back to your point. So writing is all absorbing. When you think about it, so the other things that we do as a release, even when you're PTing, when you're running, your mind wanders, right? At least mine does. And I've met a few very fortunate souls who have learned how to meditate, and I can't. I mean,
No.
I have tried. I've done the yoga stuff and all of that, and I absolutely understand the value of it and the breathing exercises, and I think all of that contributes to mental health and just for want of a better word. I know it sounds a little airy-fairy, but kind of being grounded.
Yeah.
So you have to do. It's across the board: nutrition, exercise, a little bit of the, if you're trying to meditate, breathing, but then you got to find something that consumes you, and it may be physical, or maybe for me at the time it was writing, and then so within 3 months I had 100 and whatever it was, 50,000 words,
Wow.
and it was a full book, and so I contacted Bing West, who some of you may have heard of.
Yeah.
And I'd known him when I was way back when I was an advisor, and he said, "Okay, why don't you try and get it published?" And I did. I mean, it wasn't as easy as that. It was, and for those of your listeners who are pondering writing a book, please go ahead, but bear in mind that you've got to be able to handle rejection. Mm-hmm. And even who's the Marine who wrote? Navy Crosswind wrote Matterhorn and What It's Like to Go to War.
Yeah.
Col Andy. Yeah. So both those books ended up being super bestsellers, but that dude was battered by rejection for years by publishers, until he finally found it.
And if you've read Matterhorn, you understand why, because that book, you talk about a lot of sore subjects that even the Marine Corps doesn't want to talk about. A fascinating book. And I can understand why a lot of authors wouldn't want to touch that. Mm-hmm. But once that's an absorbing book. It's one of those kind of books you literally can't put down. I think I read that book in like 3 days. It was incredible.
No, that's really awesome to hear. And on that, and this isn't me advertising the book, but I tell you what's really hit home for me and has made it all worth it is the ton of emails and messages I've had from dudes, veterans, not just Marines or Special Operations guys, across the board. I got an email the other day from Army, retired 05, just retired, and he said he picked up my book. Actually, he was in London, oddly enough, on vacation, and he said, "Hey, I was going to go out and see the sights, and I started reading your book, and 14 hours later, finished it." I laughed and cried, and he said, "I didn't realize the war had affected me so much until I read your book." Which made me feel ambivalent. I'm thinking, this dude is probably doing okay until he read my book.
Nice going, Andy.
Okay, so, finding a publisher. So there were, at the time, a glut of GWOT memoirs on the market. And, the top 10 best-selling military memoirs were all written by SEALs, by the way. No surprise. So, and most publishers were... it wasn't quite in the genre that publishers were looking for. They were looking for hey, there I was, as bullets ripped up around my feet, and I took out my K-bar and my cheese wire, and added another 3 ears to my necklace. And so, having one that was just trying to be honest and writing about some of the painful aspects of not just combat, but command and the self-doubt and some of the things that we all go through.
Sure.
Whether you were leading a fire team or you're leading a platoon, a company, or whatever it is, we all deal with those things. So anyway, eventually I found a publisher, and then I had to deal with the Pentagon, and it took 10 months for that book to be cleared by the Pentagon. You've read it, so I talk about some of the techniques of targeting that we do. I talk about signals intelligence. Yep. I talk about a lot of the stuff and I put it all in there, not because I wanted to violate classification, but because you can't really tell the story of what MARSOC does, of what MARSOC brings to the fight, without telling the story of all those capabilities, right?
Yeah, but you did it well. You did it in a way that doesn't. I don't think it gives anything away.
No, I don't think so either.
I don't think so. I mean, everyone knows that. But being able to explain why I thought the Marine C.J. Sotif was different and why Marine Sotif was different.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening who are not Marines, no, this isn't, I think you guys agree, it wasn't just straight propaganda. It's like, hey, this is what MARSOC brings to the fight. This really, if you ask what makes this different, the SEALs are in the water, they do this and that, and Army Green Berets are the UW dudes. Well, we bring a bunch of capabilities to the fight at very low level. The find, fix, finish piece that is unrivaled by other components. And having been on the TSOC staff as the chief of staff and deputy commander, I can tell you absolutely that is not propaganda. That is true.
Well, the part of it, Andy, is that I've done a joint tour, and so has Sal. And I did it. I was at SOC Yor. And
yeah.
the first thing is, first it was like I died and joined the Army. And the second thing is
that's how you spell joint, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so the issues you go through on a day-to-day basis.
Well, the shocker for me was, hey, Sal, I need you to write your finish report.
Yeah. Write yourself up for a medal. You did a good job. What kind of drugs are you on, Colonel? What? I'm not writing myself up for a goddamn medal. What are you talking about? Just do it. That's the way we do it. Well, that's not the way we do it.
Yeah.
And ergo begins the friction. And so that whole joint piece is bad enough. We're trying to even speak the same language in a high-stress environment, a.k.a. combat, and we have a mission to accomplish, but I don't agree with some of your basic philosophies.
Yeah.
And so working through that is very
And that shows up
hard.
a few times in the book too. I noticed where you ran into some friction along the way. Let me just grab this as a segue real quick, because people out there
Sure.
have to wonder. You have a unique accent, Andy. So I want to jump back to the beginning for a minute, and if you wouldn't mind, give us the rundown of your flight across Iran and through Pakistan.
Yeah, it's so a long time ago in a galaxy far away. I was growing up in the UK, and I set my heart on joining the British Army, and I was set up for what was then called a short service commission. It was a 3-year commission with the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, because you had to be sponsored by a regiment. And so I spent a week with them in Belfast. This is back in the 80s, and was all set to do that. And then I broke my leg playing rugby. It was a very bad break, and it still doesn't bend beyond 90 degrees, by the way. And I have failed every physical that I've ever done, but it hasn't. It's still managed to get a career in the Marine Corps. But anyway, so the British Army said, nope, you're a 4F category. There's no way you can join the Army. And I was in my final year at college, and so that was pretty devastating to me. So I looked around for another job. My degree was in philosophy, and so because I wanted, I just wanted to get a degree. But philosophy actually doesn't prepare you that well for jobs in anywhere.
No kidding.
And come to think of it, actually, it really doesn't prepare you that well to be a Marine. But I didn't know then that's what I was going to do. Ended up going to law school. I had to retake some exams, and so I was forced to take a year's sabbatical. I did finish law school in the end, but I took a year off, and I wanted to do something different. So my plan was to travel to Australia, going overland as much as possible. This is 1987. So 1987, remember, just like any time, the Middle East is, a lot of things are going wrong. There's the war in Afghanistan, the Iran-Iraq war is going on. So I had a plan to get across the Middle East. That was the tough part. And I got a transit visa for Iran. Just to, I won't bore your listeners with the story of how to do that, but that was quite an achievement, and it was just through some points of contact at London University. The Iranian embassy gave me a transit visa, but it was a 2-week visa, so I had to get across Iran in a hurry. So I end up getting to the border with Iran, a place called Dogbayazit in eastern Turkey, and my first introduction to Iran was the fact that the border guards shot these truck drivers, right in front of us. And we were waiting on the border for about 3 days. They found supposedly heroin in their cabs, and they just kind of dragged them out, and there's 3 of them, and shot them. And by then I was too late, I was committed. I couldn't go back and say, hey, I changed my mind. But anyway, cut a long story short. So I get into Iran. I have a fraught night in Tehran being questioned there by the Revolutionary Guard and with a Filipino interpreter. And at one point, when I ill-advisedly crack a joke, and it's obviously doesn't need a good reception. And she says to me, you can just disappear and no one cares. There's no British embassy here. There's no U.S. embassy. You've got no frame of reference for how much trouble you could be in right now.
Yeah.
So pretty quickly. Anyway, I was in, it's by extraordinary irony, and your listeners can look this up. There was something called the War of the Cities, and it was basically 5 times within the Iran-Iraq War that the Iraqis bombed and missiled the Iranian major cities, Isfahan, Shiraz, Tehran, either long-range bombers or Scud missiles. Mm-hmm. And I happened to be in Isfahan when they hit Isfahan with a barrage of Scuds. I wish I had a dramatic story. I slept through it. I was so exhausted. It's kind of, in retrospect, that's kind of ironic. I mean, I was in an Iraqi air raid.
Yeah, right.
Back then. Okay, cut to the chase. So I spend a day in jail, or night in jail, in a place called Shiraz, which was a staging point for the Iran-Iraq War, relatively near the Iraqi borders. So they were very sensitive about a foreigner wandering around there with a backpack and a camera, and I found myself incarcerated. And they released me, but they told me, get out. So I headed down to Pakistan. Was right into, and again, some of your listeners knowing that part of the world know that I am won't be exaggerating this, right into riots in a place called Kedah, which subsequently became infamous. As a birthplace of, or a home of, Al-Qaeda. And there were riots there between the blue cheese and the batons over freaking bus seats, and they were slaughtering each other in the seats, in the streets. So
don't you love the Middle East? It's a lovely place.
Seats, yeah. But I mean, anyone, again, who knows that part of the world knows that's not far-fetched. Bus seats, when you can't drink, and you have no access to women, bus seats become a huge deal.
Yeah.
And no BLTs either.
Anyway, so I get to Islamabad finally. I go into the U.S. Embassy because the only sign of intelligence that I had shown during this entire trip was to send my U.S. passport ahead to the U.S. Embassy. I was a dual national at the time, so I went into the embassy, get my passport. I run into these Marine security guards, start talking to them. They're fit-looking guys. They're living the life of Riley. I go to their Marine house, awesome place. They've got a swimming pool. They've got a pool table. They've got a well-stocked bar. And it's Friday night, and there is just a crowd of women there for that sort of thing was important to me back then. I was thinking, this is great. This is an awesome life. I could do this for 4 years, just take a 4-year sabbatical. So when I got back to the UK, I did finish law school, and then I went into the U.S. Embassy, ran into the one Marine recruiter in Europe at the time, because remember, there were U.S. high schools across Europe in the 80s, and that was it. The rest was kind of history. He's still laughing, I'm sure. Law school graduate walking in saying, I want to join the Marine Corps. I run him dry, though. Guaranteed PSC out of boot camp. Guaranteed infantry. He was sweating by the time I left that office. So I get he takes me to a team Air Force recruiter in Upper Heyford. That's the U.S. Air Force Base. This guy just wants to play golf, and he's like, hey, can you do push-ups? Doesn't look at my knee. So I get to MEPS, New York, in the duck walk. You guys remember that? I'm sure they still do the duck walk at MEPS. Yeah. It's like this weird homoerotic ritual. kind of squats and walks. I can't do that. I still can't do the duck walk. Not that I have much reason to do it now. But so they pull me out. Hey, you're going back home. You're not physically qualified to come in the U.S. military, not just the Marine Corps, but the U.S. military. And this is as all the best sea stories have this phrase in it somewhere. This is a no-shitter. They cannot figure out the line of accounting to send me back to the UK. The recruiter has taken a one-way ticket. So they spend a day trying to figure this one out, and then eventually they just go, get on the bus. So I went down to Paris, where, by the way, subsequently in the Marine Corps, I have failed every single physical. But at some point, I was wise enough to start saying, hey, if I'm not physically qualified, it's service related, because I've already been a Marine for however long.
There you go.
Yeah.
Clever.
So there you have it. Overly long answer.
No,
I'm
well,
sorry.
thank you. No, because it's well done in the book, and I found that story very funny. So,
Yeah.
Let me ask you this, Andy. There's a number of stories in your book that allude to the idea that there's a balance between aggression as a commander and restraint, right? Tactical patience. I think a number of your stories show that you have the ability, and this is the question I want to ask you. It's a long setup here, but think about the idea that is that something that can be taught, or is that something that is innate? Like the ability to make the determination of when to hold back and when to have that massive amount of aggression. The one story that really sticks in my mind was when you first landed in Somalia, and the trucks drove up to your position, and I mean they looked just like enemy trucks, but you sort of had this moment of clarity and stopped an international incident. Do you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that was almost luck that I made the right call there. And by the way, Sal and Keith, I think you guys will agree that I'm quite honest about all the wrong calls. But that was fortunately a right call. Yeah, it was the first landing in Mogadishu, December of '92. I was with 15th MEU, and we went ashore by helicopter. And as soon as we landed in the wrong LZ, of course, which invariably happens in these situations, the Pakistani UN security force that was there in Mogadishu at the time converged on us in these pickup trucks with machine guns in the back, and we, of course, were primed to expect technicals. We had been briefed on technicals, we'd seen them on television, and that's what these things look like, and that's what my Marines thought they were. And so there was a very fraught moment when we could have fired up these trucks, and fortunately we did not. To your point, Sal, I'm not evading the question, but I think that we as an institution, we Marine Corps need to do a better job of training our guys to understand that sometimes that's a tough part of, there's some really tough parts of command at any level, whether you're an officer or enlisted. And one of them is deciding when you subject your guys to a little more risk because you think in the longer term it'll pay off. Yeah. Right? What I mean by that is there's a number of reasons, and that's number one. Number two is the mission versus the men, right? We are primed always, hey, mission first, men second. But sometimes it's not as clear cut as that. Well, what if your mission makes no sense? Yeah. What if you're working for a total jackass who has given you guys a mission that is going to result in unnecessary casualties? Is it really always the mission versus the men? At what point do indecipherable goals or nonsensical missions mean that your responsibility shifts back to the lead? That's a tough call.
Yeah, Andy.
I'm sorry.
No. I agree with you 100% on that. Sal and I, we talk about this when we teach, is some things are more art than science.
Exactly.
And too often, we have senior commanders who have this myopic vision that you can put everything on a piece of paper, on a chart, on a graph, on a slide, and this happens, and this happens, and this happens.
Yeah.
And that's not reality. And the public, especially our esteemed government leaders, don't understand that in the heat of the moment, it's a gut call. And it cannot be put down in paper. You cannot necessarily teach that in this instance, in this situation, I'm going to do X every time.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way.
It's like, it's
Yep.
effective intelligence. It's the application
Yeah.
of effective intelligence.
That's exactly right. Yep, that's, so I tell you something, and MARSOC does an extraordinarily good job in selecting guys with that level of emotional intelligence at a low level.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I've noticed time and time again, and most recently in northern Iraq, where you had guys at the rank of, a staff sergeant having to make really hard calls based on their knowledge of all the tangled mosaic of local cultures and that they had to deal with, with the different Kurdish groups, the Iraqi Shia groups, the Iraqi army. I mean, in the book, I talk about that one incident. If Captain Scott Hollett and Master Sergeant Craig Colby are listening, they will forgive me for mentioning their names. But their team, in an extraordinarily complex situation, during an attack on an ISIS position with the Peshmerga, and I'm there with them, and the Iraqi Air Force bombs them. The Iraqi Air Force shows up, and who knows if it was an accident or not. The Iraqis hate the Kurds, and they drop a bomb just 50 meters from a Swedish OP, and meanwhile the team cannot get fire support for their Peshmerga partners. I gave the order to allow them to use organic weapons, but all the decisions at that point that had to be made on the ground by relatively junior guys with an very, very complex situation, dynamic, unraveling quickly, and the wrong decision wouldn't have just resulted in casualties; it could have resulted in catastrophic effects on the U.S. effort or on our partners. And yet, time and again, I've seen. And this isn't propaganda. MARSOC guys just make the right call.
Yeah.
Scott Hollett is a captain. He was a captain now. I think he's a major now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Scott was dealing with Rasta Rasul, who was the head of the PUK. I mean, he was, and Scott will forgive me if I'm getting this wrong, but one of the senior Kurdish officials went to Scott to consult him on things. Scott and Craig, more so than they would go to a U.S. Army conventional general. So MARSOC does a great job on this. And back to your point, Sal, about tactical patience, I'll give you another example that occurred that I saw as an advisor in Mosul, the days before MARSOC was even around. Mosul turned, as I talk about in the book, in the aftermath of Fallujah, sections of Iraq, Mosul included, just turned into dreadful shitholes. Not that they were particularly nice places before, but the local police and the army just evaporated, and the insurgents, pretty much the Rouge, took over. Mosul was one of those places, and so there was an army brigade there. The 101st Airborne had moved out, and they were replaced by a single brigade. And that brigade was under pressure. They'd taken casualties in a massive suicide bomb attack on one of their FOBs, and those guys were, it's difficult to describe, almost a state of paranoia. And they were killing, I would say, certainly every week, dozens of civilians at roadblocks, just through fear, and those of you who worked with Iraqis and, what Arab culture know that there's a certain, there's a lot of positive aspects of their culture, hospitality and everything, but there is also what I would call insouciance. They don't necessarily lack the situational awareness, right?
Yeah.
So but they will drive, and they drive like madmen, and so you get guys again and again approaching roadblocks with their families, just not knowing what the hell's going on, and getting killed. And it occurred to me, we spent all this time in pre-deployment training with these cultural niceties of don't point your feet at people and don't eat with your left hand. And then we kill families at roadblocks because we just lack the emotional intelligence to understand, okay, this is probably just a family and they're driving fast, but I'm not gonna fire them up. I'm gonna put myself a little bit at risk to determine what the hell's going on because I don't, and I have no doubt that MARSOC does a good job of making people understand that, that kind of call at a junior level. But with conventional forces, we're dreadful at that. And the problem is that we generate recruits for the insurgency by killing innocent people.
Yeah.
And you get commanders who are morally lazy and are just primed to, hey, you've heard this line, right? If my Marines or soldiers felt they were at risk, I'm going to back them 100%.
Yeah.
Well, dude, guess what? You just contributed to the insurgency, but also you've contributed to moral wounds that your own guys are going to have to suffer in the years ahead because they killed innocent people.
Yeah.
So it's that aspect of leadership that we don't do a good job of teaching.
So Andy, that's a perfect segue to talk about, because one of the things Keith and I have talked about, we talked with John Daly about this as well, who's a prolific writer, as you know, is the ability to use the writing as a form of like self-healing.
Yeah, a cathartic mechanism. If you would.
Very much so for me.
Yeah.
And I hope, you guys having read the book though will think that, agree that it's, you've got to be careful, of course, if it's for public consumption, that you're not getting too self-indulgent.
Right.
There's a whole stream of addiction books on the market that I think are quite self-indulgent. So writing...
But it gives you an opportunity to sort of work through some things, though. You agree with that, Andy? It's like, even though you're not... Yeah, sorry about the delay. Even though if you don't end up writing it and publishing it that way, it gives you an opportunity to write through some stuff, and in your editing you can get some of that out of there.
Yeah.
You at least get the opportunity to sort of dig into the feelings and sort of digest them a little bit as you're doing the writing, no?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. It is cathartic. I struggled for a while. Honestly, I thought I had imposter syndrome. I thought that I thought that I was so mentally unstable that I shouldn't be given commands, but I kept getting given, 05 command and then 06 command. How often do you hear someone say that?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of your listeners are probably saying, you're right, dude, you are too mentally unstable to have been given commands.
It's funny, I wrote a note on imposter syndrome, Andy, because I really, that spoke to me, especially coming from the prior enlisted route.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think prior enlisted guys get the same kind of feeling, and then you have a tendency to maybe overcompensate in your leadership style because you're trying to fit in or whatever. But I really, that resonated with me.
Well,
the idea of
self-doubt is just, at one level, I think it's a healthy part of leadership is not believing you're Caesar, that you are fallible. But in the middle of the night, when you're laying there on the ground thinking, "Fuck, did I do this right?" And you start to second guess yourself.
Yeah.
And luckily, at least for me, I was very lucky. Sergeant Major Coffee, it's to this day is one of my best friends in the world. Hey, Bill, what are we doing here? What do you think? And you'd have a sounding board. And if you're lucky, and the Marine Corps has such good staff NCOs, I think officers are extremely lucky in that regard, but without that sounding board, and without that ability to self-evaluate, you can go down a dark path very easy. And
you guys hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. I'm very glad that you guys worded it beautifully. Exactly, there's a couple of things going on. So I think your comment, Sal, about prior enlisted guys, I think is right on target. Being prior enlisted myself, there is always, you start off as a private at the bottom of the pyramid, and then suddenly you find yourself. I was a corporal. I was on it was ECP, so I was a corporal. I went to OCS, and I came back 10 weeks later as a second lieutenant. And so you start off on that route going, holy shit, I don't believe this, man. And, suddenly you've got these staff sergeants and gunnies who you lived in fear of now saluting you when you come back and you think this can't be true, this isn't real, and that. So to your point, Pete, there's a healthy aspect of that. I think every commander should have to deal with a certain amount of self-doubt because of the responsibility that you have. If you don't examine yourself closely, you're never going to improve, and B, you're never really going to listen to your subordinates and make increasingly wise decisions. It's a fine line because you don't want to paralyze yourself with self-doubt. I've worked for guys honestly who were paralyzed in that way. They kept wanting more information, and kept asking, what do you think? What do you think? And the other way that it can count against you is, I think this gets to your point, Sal, especially prior enlisted dudes, but officers generally, if they pander too much to their subordinates, it's a fine line, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're a smart guy, you always ask for input. I mean, I always used to.
But it's that art versus science.
What do you think?
We go back to that, is it art or science methodology? And it is.
Exactly.
And it's the guys used to drive me crazy. A lot of things drive me crazy, but there's times when you got to take the 80% solution and go.
Yeah,
and I've worked for guys who want the 100% solution. I'm like, while you're busy fiddling here, Nero, Rome is burning to the ground. Yeah. Take the 80% solution, we'll figure it out when we get there. And that's a tough call, too. Because if it goes sideways, then you start to second guess yourself. It's on you.
You own it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
it's recognizing that you own it, but willing to own it. Those are traits that are absolutely critical, but they are not commonly held. And
exactly.
Back to your point, Sal, we probably all worked for guys who pandered too much to kind of popular opinion within their units, and that can be dangerous too, because all Marines bitch.
Perpetually.
It's a healthy aspect of our culture, I mean, we all do. I've done it too. I mean, shit, read my book.
Andy, there's only two kinds of Marines. There's Marines that are getting hooked up and Marines that are getting fucked over. There's no other.
That's right.
We know.
And high headquarters never understands what the hell's going on.
No.
So I'm not exempt from that either. Knowing, if being able to walk that line between, you've got to care about the opinions of your subordinates and their input and value them, but at the same time, you've got to know when it's your call to make and to go ahead with that.
Yeah.
And there's another aspect of this too. Understanding, being able to reverse a decision when you know you've been wrong.
Yeah.
That is not a common trait.
Yeah.
And
the guy
again,
can stand up.
The other way too.
Yeah, but if you can stand up at the end of the day and go, hey, stop, I fucked this up. Let's reset.
Exactly.
That, the men, your subordinates will respect the shit out of you if you have the balls to do that. And there's times you got to do it. And we've all been there. You go, oh, that didn't work out the way I thought it was going to. What do you got? We need to fix this, change gears, whatever. But that's part of the leadership aspect. How do you teach that? I can tell a young lieutenant or a staff sergeant or a gunny, this is a thing, you need to be able to do this. But to internalize that and make that decision is something else again.
Well, that's interesting because we build an infallibility package into the way we train our officers. Having gone through the process, there is a piece of how we train officers to take responsibility all the time.
Yeah.
And to provide or present or project an image a certain way that kind of feeds into that.
But how many times have you seen, I've seen an officer who totally punted it right into the stands and refused to own it.
Yeah.
It wasn't his fault, the dog ate his homework, helicopters were late, whatever, and I'm like, you can sit there and everybody's looking at this guy like, you're full of shit. You screwed this up, let's move on.
Yeah.
I think somewhere along the line, some guys learn that they they learn some of the wrong things. They learn that, hey, if you set a course, you stay with it, and that consistency is important. Well, consistency is important, but it gets back to your art and science, knowing consistency and a stupid decision is not good. It's like, and honestly, I've seen plenty of that. Oh my God.
Yeah.
You just touched on something. Oh yeah. So, I think generally we do a pretty good job in the Marine Corps in training officers. I think we have easily the best enlisted leaders across the board.
Yeah.
I don't think we do. I think that's honestly, there's some alchemy that results in that, though. I don't think that the Marine Corps professional education system is really focused on developing enlisted leaders. Okay, and I know some people may disagree, and I know MARSOC is different, and maybe it has changed, but you look at what JSAL does, or with where JSOFC and which is a great course, and the way that they treat enlisted guys who come for that course, and they they take them to really to a higher level. They give them a wider view of the world. For the longest time, Marine professional academies just couldn't struggle past the drill and ceremonies manual.
That's true.
Instead of saying, hey, listen, this is a great chance to really educate our guys for the next level. Yeah. And treating them like graduates, which is how they should be, because they have essentially, whether they went to college or not, I know they've earned a degree. They've earned a degree in psychology and leadership and things that most of their civilian counterparts who are graduates never learn. So treat them that way, and take them to that next level.
Yeah.
But I don't know what you guys think about that. But I don't think the Marine Corps, I'm sure it's doing a better job now, but until now it's.
We get some feedback from our students that they are making efforts to make improvements.
They are making efforts. I think, go on a limb on this one, but we query all of our students who've been through those senior courses, what they thought about it, mostly as relates to the methodology of the teaching. Do they understand the Socratic method? Do they do guided discussions properly? Things like that.
Active learning environment.
Active learning environment, but like passive learning environment. And a lot of our students say, no, they're not there yet. And I've had this discussion with the CO. I said, I think part of the problem, Marine Corps-wide, is we're sending the wrong guys to these academies to be the instructors. And they're getting the syllabus, and they're reading the slides, and here's your diploma next. And they're not getting guys who are,
or they're not trained, or maybe it's their train the trainer program that needs some improvement. I'm not really sure exactly where the problems might lie, though.
I think there's an institutional piece to this too, though, right?
Sure.
I think, and hopefully the new commandant's going to change this. But I would love to see the Marine Corps go the route that the special operations community has in how they treat their enlisted personnel who come in for professional education. I think hopefully those of your listeners who've been to JSOFC will agree that is a good course.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
They're great. I mean, great point, Keith. And again, I'm dated already, even though I only retired a year ago. Hey, here's another few guys that. And it gets back to what you were talking about earlier, kind of about the emotional intelligence piece and learning yourself from your own mistakes. I found that in command, and during the last counting regiment and then Siege Soda, that was almost 5 years. Yeah, almost 5 years of command straight. And I say that not to out of bravado, but to say that if you'd taken me at any point in that, I would have honestly told you, hey, look, I would look back in the last year and say, I can't believe I did this or that. And as a regimental commander, generally, I would look back on my time as battalion commander, and maybe I focused too much on mistakes, but I would say, oh my God, you know. I can't believe it. So it was a constant learning experience.
Yeah.
By the way, this will probably blow you on your asses, but I know that it's part of our ethos as Marines, enlisted or officer, to say, hey, you always have to be in charge. You always want to be in charge. And I would say, yes, that is true, but I don't miss it for a moment.
Yeah, I can relate to that.
Yeah.
You know, when I go overseas now with JSAL, and when I'm a team lead, I've got 2 other dudes, and that's just enough responsibility for me now. It's 2 other retired.
It'll let you focus.
Officers or colonels.
It'll let you focus on writing more, Andy. So look, the time is kind of running out here, but I want to just give one more pitch to folks. Like, if you enjoyed this conversation and you can see the type of person that Andy is, I would implore you to take a look at his book. We're going to put the link for this to purchase it down in the bottom under the description. But I really enjoyed your book, Andy, and I enjoyed this conversation
Absolutely.
today. So I'm glad you could make the time to do this for us. And then the last thing I would say is, if you like the channel, like Keith said in the beginning, go ahead and subscribe, because what that does for us is allows us to monetize. And once we can monetize, we can start buying better equipment, and we'll have a bit more of a budget, because this is all our hobby right now.
Yeah.
Another way you can support the channel is we're selling these cups. If you go to axeheadcoffee.com, you can get yourself a cup. Andy, we're going to send you one of these. I'll get your address afterwards. This is a gift from us for being on the show. But these are all just ways that you can support the show and help us to grow the brand a little bit, and reach out to help more Marines get things like their books or their coffee.
And more money, more beer. So it's all good.
Exactly. So thanks, Andy. We appreciate your time today.
Hey, thanks. You guys did you really didn't need me here. This is a great conversation. Want to thank John Daly. I'm a big fan of John's, for making the introduction.
Yes, sir.
And actually everyone there at the schoolhouse. I'm not blowing smoke at you guys, but you do a phenomenal job. And hopefully Eric Thompson's being relatively easy on you guys. Task Force Thompson, we used to call him when he was my XO. And 1-3. And I won't tell you stories about him. He's paid me not to. So.
Well, stay safe in this crazy.
Thanks, Andy.
Hey guys, great pleasure. All the best to you guys.
Take care.
Bye.